Hey, my name is Rahul, and in this video, we'll be doing a walkthrough of the Week 1 project for Android University. This project is called Flicks, and this project allows the user to view a list of movies where the data is coming from the Movie Database API. There are two requirements to this assignment. First, you want to show a list of movies where each movie shows a picture, title, and overview about that movie. The second requirement is, depending on the configuration of the phone, you want to show a different view. So in portrait mode, you have a taller image followed by the title and overview of the movie on the right side. And in landscape mode, you want to show a view which is more optimized for a wider viewing perspective rather than taller. And so you can see here, this image, which is called the backdrop image, is wider than it is taller. And then similarly to how it is in portrait mode, you want to show the title and overview on the right side. There are also a bunch of stretch stories that we talk about here. These are optional, but once you complete the required stories, you should start going through these and tackling them. And then there are also some helpful cliff notes linked at the bottom. So let's talk for a little bit about the Movie Database API. If you click on this link here, you'll get to the documentation. So the Movie Database API is how we're going to power our application in this assignment. This is how we're going to get data. An API, taking a step back, is an application programming interface. At a very basic level, an API is what defines a method of communication among different components. And this is a really fundamental concept in programming. So for our purposes, an API is a way we can make network requests and get data back according to some specification that's defined here in the documentation. So APIs are really powerful because they allow you to send and receive data according to different requests or commands that you issue. So in our app, because we're not actually going to be creating or editing any objects, our app is read-only, and so we're only going to be receiving data. We're not going to be sending data to the API. So the endpoint that we care about is called now playing. And so this is called the endpoint, and you combine the endpoint with the base URL. And the base URL that we're going to be using is api.themoviedb.org/3. 3 is indicating that's the version of the API. And then the documentation tells us that this endpoint gives us a list of movies in theaters. Down here, you can look at the different query strings. These are basically parameters in which you can provide in order to filter the data in any way you want. One really important point here is that you need to specify an API key, and that's used for authentication. So if you don't specify the API key, then you'll basically get a permission denied error, and you won't get any data back. So if you go back to the course portal, you can see that we actually have given you an API key right here. So you're welcome to use that, or you could go ahead and request your own developer API key by reading through the documentation. So once you have an API key, you should be able to get data back successfully. One thing I'd recommend that you do before you actually look at the data is download this Chrome extension called JSON View Chrome extension. And this will basically allow you to, in the browser, be able to render the JSON in a better formatting. And so once you have it downloaded, then you can actually open up this sample request, which is using the Codepath API key. And you should get data that looks something like this. So the data that we get back from the API is called JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, but it actually doesn't have anything to do with any particular programming language. It's independent of any language. And JSON is really important because many APIs use JSON as a way to communicate data. JSON is basically how you take the data and encode it so that then different applications that are consuming that data can parse it and use it and do whatever they want with it. And so this open curly brace and ending curly brace indicates that the data that we got back from this API endpoint is a JSON object. With a JSON object, you have different keys, and these keys can have different values. So in this example, we have 5 different JSON keys, and you can see that some of them have integers as the value. Dates is a key which has a JSON object as the value. So you can actually have JSON objects nested within JSON objects, and you can kind of go as deeply nested as you want. The key that we really care about for this API response is actually this one, which is called results. And inside of it, you can see that we have an open square bracket and closing square bracket. This indicates that results is actually the value of this key is a JSON array. So if I expand that, each element in this JSON array is actually a JSON object, right? And so each JSON object represents a movie. So this JSON object, you can see that we have attributes of the movie, such as title, called Incredibles 2, an overview, which is basically a summary of what happened, and then a poster path. And one thing you'll notice here about the poster path is that this is a relative URL, which means that if you actually enter this URL into your browser, you won't get any image data back. What you need to do to actually get the URL for the full image is take the poster path and go back to the course portal, go into hints, and there's a section here about configurations API response. And that's what you'll use in order to figure out how to generate the full URL path. So the way it'll end up working is you'll have a base URL. You'll need to combine that base URL for images with an image size. And at the end, then you'll add in the image path. So the configurations API response, if you open that up, this is what will tell you what are the valid sizes for your image. So you can see for backdrop sizes, you have 4 different options for size, logo sizes, post size, and so on. This is what specifies the valid size. So in this example, you can see that we have the base URL followed by W342. Most likely that means a width of 342 pixels for the image. And then you attach the actual relative path of the URL. So if you open that up, you can actually see the image like you'd expect. Now that we have an understanding of the API along with the requirements of the project, let's start coding.